Hello class, it's Mrs. Poffenberger. Today's lesson is going to be the second part of chapter 1, which is going to look at homeostasis, anatomical position, and directional terms. So starting out with homeostasis, homeostasis is just the process that our body undergoes to maintain a stable internal environment. And in order for us to have normal body functioning, we have to be in a state of homeostasis. And we have to remain in that state in order to sustain life. So right now I want you to think about, when is your body not in homeostasis? So think about that question, and a box will pop up in Edpuzzle and put in your answer. So hopefully you put something in your answer saying that when you maybe exercise, your body's not in homeostasis because of increased heart rate, increased breathing rate. Maybe you put that when you're sick, you're not in homeostasis because your body temperature is elevated. Your electrolytes might not be in the correct balance. So those would be two examples of when you're not in homeostasis. So the next thing we'll talk about here is anatomical position. So anatomical position is the standard body position that is used as a reference. And in your book, when you see full body diagrams, most of the time they will be in anatomical position. So anatomical position, the body is standing straight up with the feet parallel and the arms hanging down at the sides, palms facing forward. Okay, so this is considered anatomical position. And it's very important that we know this position and look at diagrams in this position because we use it to determine locations of the body. And we'll see that as we start going over some of these terms. So we're going to get into what's sort of known as the language of anatomy. There are a lot of special terms and terminology that's used in anatomy so that misunderstandings do not happen. So there's a lot of common words for parts of the body, but we need an actual language that all doctors, nurses, etc. understand and know. So we have exact terms that we're going to use for position, direction, regions, and structures. And today we're going to go over the directional terms. With directional terms, a lot of these come in pairs that are opposite of one another. Okay, so our first pair here would be superior and inferior. So superior means toward the head end or upper part of a structure of the body, or above. So just think of superior meaning toward the head, above. So when we use superior in a sentence, we can say the forehead is superior to the nose because the forehead is above the nose. So it's superior to the nose. Inferior is the opposite of that. So inferior means away from the head region or upper part of a structure or the body, and it means below. So if we use inferior in a sentence, the nose is inferior to the forehead. So we can just switch those two statements and switch the words. So if we say the forehead is superior to the nose, that means the forehead's above the nose. If we say the nose is inferior to the forehead, that means the nose is below the forehead. The next set of directional terms are anterior and posterior. So anterior means toward or at the front of the body or in front of. So that's anterior. So the example here, the breastbone is anterior to the spine. So the breastbone is in front of the spine. And then posterior would be the opposite, so toward or at the back side of the body, or meaning behind. So the heart is posterior to the breastbone. The heart is behind the breastbone. Next set of terms would be medial and lateral. So medial means toward the midline of the body. So here's the midline of the body. So toward the midline of the body, or on the inner side of. So the heart is medial to the arm because it's more toward the midline of the body. Heart is medial to the arm. And then lateral means away from the midline of the body or on the outer side of. So the arms are lateral to the chest. So arms are on the outer part or away from the midline in comparison to the chest. Intermediate is a directional term that doesn't have a pair. So the term intermediate just means between a more medial and a more lateral structure. So in between a structure that's medial and a structure that's lateral. So the armpit is intermediate between the breastbone and the shoulder because it's in between. So think of intermediate as being in between. Proximal and distal are the directional terms that most students struggle with the most because they're a little more tricky and not as straightforward as the other ones. But proximal just means close to the origin of the body part or the point of attachment of a limb to the body trunk. Okay, so we can think of these in terms of the legs. Where the legs meet the body trunk, that's at the hip. So anything that's close to the hip or close to that point of attachment of the leg to the body trunk is a more proximal structure. Same with the arm to the shoulder. Okay, the shoulder is much more proximal because it's actually right at the attachment of the arm to the body trunk. Okay, so looking at our example, the elbow is proximal to the wrist. So here's the elbow and here's the wrist. The elbow is closer to the point of attachment of the arm to the body trunk. So basically closer to the shoulder than the wrist is. So the elbow is proximal, because proximal means closer, than the wrist. The opposite of proximal would be distal. So distal means farther from the origin of a body part or the point of attachment of a limb to the body trunk. Okay, so further away from the hip, further away from the shoulder. So the knee is distal to the thigh. Okay, so here's the knee, here's the thigh. The thigh is closer to the point of attachment of the leg to the body trunk. So the thigh is proximal, where the knee is distal, because the knee is farther than the thigh from the body trunk. And then our last two directional terms are superficial and deep. So superficial means toward or at the surface of the body. So good example or good statement here, the skin is superficial to the skeleton. So the skin is right at the surface of the body, where the skeleton is more deep, more internal. And then so the term deep just means away from the body surface, more internal. So the lungs are deep to the chest because they are more internal, the lungs are deep to the rib cage because the lungs are more internal. They're farther away from the body surface than the rib cage. Okay, so just looking at this diagram to review those directional terms. So remember, superior means toward the head, inferior means away from the head. Medial means toward the midline of the body, lateral means away from the midline of the body. Anterior means toward the front of the body, posterior means toward the back of the body. You'll also see ventral and dorsal being shown with anterior and posterior. Ventral means the same as anterior, dorsal means the same as posterior. And then proximal and distal. Proximal means closer to the point of attachment of the limb to the body trunk. Distal means further away from the point of attachment of a limb to the body trunk. Okay, that's all for part 2. We'll see you later for part 3. Have a great one.